A badge is supposed to stand for justice, but inside this precinct, it had become a shield for arrogance, cruelty, and unchecked power. That was until the day one officer spat on the wrong man. The air in the precinct was thick with stale coffee and cheap cologne, but nothing smelled worse than the rot of hypocrisy festering in its walls. As Marcus Reynolds stepped through the side entrance, dressed in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt, he wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a test that the men sworn to protect and serve failed spectacularly. "Hey, you," a voice sneered. Officer Brad Taylor, a white cop with a chip on his shoulder the size of his ego, strutted forward, flanked by a few smirking officers. "You lost? This ain't a shelter?" The laughter that followed was sharp, cruel, and unapologetic. Marcus tried to respond, but Taylor didn't care. He didn't see a man. He saw something less. "Didn't you hear me? Get the hell out." And then, in a moment so vile it made the walls of the precinct shake, Taylor spat in his face. The room erupted in laughter. A police officer, a man who swore an oath to uphold justice, had just degraded another human being for his own sick entertainment. But the laughter died the moment Marcus pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his face with an agonizing slowness, and said, "Is this how you treat everyone who walks through these doors?" His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. And oh, the storm was coming. Silence hung in the air like the final note of a funeral dirge. Marcus Reynolds stood there, his face still damp from the disgrace spat at him by Officer Brad Taylor, the man who had just condemned himself without even realizing it. The laughter had faded into uneasy murmurs, the other officers shifting on their feet, suddenly uncertain, because the man they thought was just another nobody wasn't backing down. Brad Taylor smirked, still drunk on the power he thought he had. "What's the matter, old man? Can't take a little joke?" His voice was thick with arrogance, the same kind that had been festering in that precinct for years. Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step forward, closing the gap between them. His eyes, dark and unreadable, bore into Taylor's with the weight of something ancient, something righteous. A joke. His voice was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that turns stomachs and chills bones. "Tell me something, Officer Taylor. That badge on your chest, what does it stand for?" Taylor blinked, confused. "What?" Marcus tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "That badge," he repeated, pointing at the tarnished piece of metal pinned to Taylor's uniform. "Is it just a shiny piece of tin to you? Something you wear so people have to respect you? Or does it actually mean something?" Taylor scoffed, but the nervous glance he shot to his fellow officers betrayed him. "I don't have to answer to you." Marcus let the words hang between them for a moment before shaking his head. "No, you don't," he admitted. "But you do have to answer to the people you swore to protect." He let his gaze sweep the room, making sure every single officer felt the weight of his words. "And what I saw today?" He exhaled sharply, disgust curling his lips. "You're not protectors. You're cowards." The room tensed. A few officers bristled, but no one dared to speak. Marcus continued, voice rising, steel creeping into his tone. "You think that uniform gives you the right to decide who's worth respect and who's not? That badge isn't a license to be a thug with legal immunity. It's a promise to serve, to be better, to hold yourselves to a higher standard than the criminals you chase down." His voice cracked with fury, the rage of every single person who had ever been on the receiving end of an unchecked badge. But here you are, laughing, spitting on your oath like it means nothing, like justice is just a word you throw around when it's convenient. Taylor's face twisted with anger. "You don't know a damn thing about this department, don't I?" Marcus barked. "Because I walked in here today and found exactly what I expected. A culture of arrogance, corruption, and a brotherhood of bullies who think their badges put them above the people they serve." A heavy pause filled the room. The truth hit them like a sledgehammer to the gut. The bravado in Taylor's posture cracked, his fists clenching at his sides. The other officers avoided Marcus's gaze, some suddenly fascinated with the floor, others shifting uneasily, their loyalty to Taylor starting to crumble. Marcus took one last step forward, his face inches from Taylor's. "You think you're untouchable?" His voice was lethal now. You think you can hide behind that uniform and do whatever the hell you want? Well, guess what, officer? Your time is up. A thin blue wall of silence. That's what they called it. The unspoken rule that no matter what happens, no matter what line is crossed, you protect your own. And today, that wall was cracking right down the middle. Marcus Reynolds stood in the heart of that precinct, staring into the faces of men and women who had sworn an oath to uphold justice. But what kind of justice was this? The kind where a police officer spits in a man's face and the room erupts in laughter? The kind where the people entrusted with protecting the community revel in humiliation and cruelty? The rage inside Marcus burned like a wildfire, but he held it in check. Barely. He knew men like Officer Brad Taylor. They thrived on arrogance, on the sick pleasure of knowing that the system had their backs no matter how rotten they were. And the worst part? The others let it happen. Not just today. Not just in this room. Every damn day. He took another step forward, eyes sweeping the room. You're all real quiet now, he said, voice sharp enough to cut through the thick, suffocating tension. Where's that laughter? Where's all that bravado? Taylor's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw twitching. You're twisting this, he snapped. I was just putting a bum in his place. A bum? Marcus's voice exploded through the room, and even the officers in the back flinched. That's what you think this job is? Putting people in their place? You think your badge makes you a king, that it gives you the right to decide who's worthy of respect and who isn't? Taylor opened his mouth, but Marcus wasn't done. You know what that badge is supposed to stand for? Honor, integrity, duty. But when you spat in my face, when you laughed, when you all stood there and let it happen, you spat on every damn thing that badge is supposed to mean. The room felt like a powder keg, ready to blow. Some officers shifted, their expressions dark with unease. A few looked at Taylor like they were seeing him for the first time, like they were realizing just how deep the rot went. Marcus turned, scanning every single face. You think this is just about one bad cop? You think Taylor's the only problem? His voice dropped lower now, the kind of calm that makes a man's stomach turn to ice. The real problem? It's the silence, the complicity, the fact that some of you saw what he did and you laughed. Or worse, you said nothing. A heavy silence suffocated the room. Taylor's face was flushed, his arrogance cracking like shattered glass. You call yourselves officers of the law? Let me tell you something, Marcus growled. You aren't lawmen. You're cowards hiding behind a badge that means nothing in your hands. The silence was deafening. Marcus Reynolds stood at the center of the precinct, his presence a thunderstorm ready to break. Around him, officers avoided his gaze, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring at the floor like children caught in a lie. The weight of their own complicity hung over them like a noose. You all think this is just about one bad cop? Marcus spat, his voice dripping with venom. You think Officer Taylor is the only problem in this room? The only one who let power rot him from the inside out? He let the question hang, let the tension twist the air so tight it felt ready to snap. A few officers had the decency to look ashamed. Others, like Taylor, looked defiant. But Marcus knew the truth. Taylor wasn't some lone wolf. He wasn't an outlier. No, Taylor was a symptom of a sickness that had spread through this department like gangrene, and the men standing in this room had let it fester. This place is sick, Marcus seethed. And the sickness isn't just Taylor. It's every single one of you who saw what he did and did nothing. Every one of you who let this garbage thrive because you were too damn scared, too damn comfortable, or worse. You agreed with him. Taylor scoffed, his arrogance bubbling back to the surface. Oh, give me a break, he sneered. You walk in here acting like you know everything about this department, about these men. Marcus cut him off with a laugh, a low, humorless, bitter thing. Know you? Oh, I know you, Taylor. I know you real damn well. I've seen men like you in every precinct, in every city. The ones who wear their badge like a crown, who think a gun and a uniform give them the right to play God. You think you are the law, but you're nothing but a thug with a license to terrorize. Taylor's face twisted with anger. He opened his mouth, but Marcus was already turning away, already looking at the rest of the officers, The ones who hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. The ones who thought their silence would shield them. "How many of you knew about him?" Marcus demanded, his voice cutting through the still air like a blade. "How many of you heard the way he talks about people behind closed doors? How many of you saw him cross the line, abuse his power, treat people like dirt, and said nothing?" Nobody spoke. "That's what I thought," Marcus growled, his stomach churned with disgust. This wasn't just a bad cop problem. This was a culture problem, a disease. "And let me tell you something," Marcus said, his voice sharp as broken glass. "That disease, it dies today." The air inside the precinct was thick, suffocating, like the walls themselves were sweating under the weight of Marcus Reynolds's words. His voice had been a wrecking ball, smashing through the thin blue wall of silence that had protected these men for years. Now they had nowhere to hide. "You think this place runs on loyalty?" Marcus's voice was a razor's edge, cutting through the stillness. "You think keeping your mouth shut, turning a blind eye makes you a good cop? That it makes you one of the brothers? Let me tell you what it really makes you, a coward." A few officers flinched. Others clenched their jaws, swallowing the truth like broken glass. Marcus could see it in their eyes, the battle waging inside them. Some were just now realizing how deep the rot had spread, while others had known all along and chose to look the other way. "You think Taylor's the only one?" Marcus continued, his voice rising like a storm rolling in. "You think I don't know there are more of you who get off on throwing your weight around? Who think that badge is a license to treat people like garbage? How many complaints have been buried? How many people have walked through those doors looking for help only to be treated like dirt?" Silence. A muscle in Taylor's jaw twitched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he muttered, but his voice lacked the fire it had before. "Out of proportion?" Marcus let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You spat in my face, and this room laughed. You humiliated a man you didn't know because you thought you could, because you thought no one would stop you, and you know why? Because no one ever has." The weight of his words slammed into the room. Some of the younger officers looked away, shame creeping into their expressions. Others shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward Taylor like they were seeing him for the first time. Marcus took a slow step forward. "But guess what?" His voice was steady now, lethal in its calm. "That ends today. I don't give a damn how long you've been here. I don't care how many friends you have in high places. The era of look the other way is over." His gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with every single officer, burning his message into their skulls. "If you're a good cop, you'll prove it. You'll stand up, you'll hold your brothers accountable, and you'll act like that badge actually means something. And if you can't..." He turned back to Taylor, stepping inches from his face. "Then get the hell out of my precinct, because I promise you, if you stand for corruption, you will not stand for long." Marcus Reynolds let the silence settle, let it fester, let it make these men squirm in their own guilt. The walls of this precinct had seen decades of unchecked power, of abuse masked as authority, of silence disguised as loyalty. But today, that silence was dead. "You wear that badge, you carry a gun, and you call yourselves protectors?" His voice was razor sharp, dripping with disgust. "You want respect? Earn it. Respect isn't given because you flash a badge. It's earned by how you treat the people who don't have one." Taylor's face was ashen, his confidence shattered, his kingdom falling apart before his eyes. The officers who once stood with him now looked away, shame and fear settling in. Marcus took one final step forward. "Change is here. You either rise to meet it or you get the hell out of my way." In 2025, accountability in law enforcement is no longer just an ideal, it's a demand. Marcus Reynolds' stand against corruption isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that a badge should symbolize justice, not unchecked power. His fight exposes a truth too often ignored. Silence is complicity. How many more precincts operate under the same rot? How many officers hide behind the brotherhood, refusing to hold their own accountable? Change isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. And leaders like Marcus prove that when one man has the courage to act, he forces an entire system to face itself. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Should Marcus fire the officers who stood by silently? Should he push for department-wide reform? Comment below, because this isn't just his fight, it's ours. Let's demand integrity from those who wear the badge and ensure that justice isn't just a slogan, but a standard. Marcus Reynolds let the silence settle, let it fester, let it make these men squirm in their own guilt. The walls of this precinct had seen decades of unchecked power, of abuse masked as authority, of silence disguised as loyalty. But today, that silence was dead. You wear that badge, you carry a gun, and you call yourselves protectors? His voice was razor sharp, dripping with disgust. You want respect? Earn it. Respect isn't given because you flash a badge. It's earned by how you treat the people who don't have one. Taylor's face was ashen, his confidence shattered, his kingdom falling apart before his eyes. The officers who once stood with him now looked away, shame and fear settling in. Marcus took one final step forward. Change is here. You either rise to meet it or you get the hell out of my way. In 2025, accountability in law enforcement is no longer just an ideal, it's a demand. Marcus Reynolds' stand against corruption isn't just a story, it's a wake-up call. It reminds us that a badge should symbolize justice, not unchecked power. His fight exposes a truth too often ignored. Silence is complicity. How many more precincts operate under the same rot? How many officers hide behind the brotherhood, refusing to hold their own accountable? Change isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. And leaders like Marcus prove that when one man has the courage to act, he forces an entire system to face itself. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Should Marcus fire the officers who stood by silently? Should he push for department-wide